probably put together a convention videotape. He's got all the professional capabilities. It looks like he didn't get up yet this morning. If you send him a copy, I'll bet we can put together a real nice collection of stuff. Okay. It's going to be a lot of touchy-feely here because I'm going to pass a lot of these things around in the audience. They're just absolutely too neat not to look and see. So we'll go ahead and get started. First thing I'm going to talk about, I think people are interested in, is composite motor construction. And we don't recommend that you do this at home, but we've got a bunch of composite motors that are cut up in various configurations so you can see just exactly what goes on. Let's see if I've got one here to start with. Okay, this is a typical Aerotech motor, and what it's got is got a paper phenolic casing and a plastic nozzle, and it has a delay train on the inside that is bonded in place. And what I'm going to do is take apart the motor. Oh, this one's going to come out. Take apart the motor and show you kind of how they go together. What he does in order to build his motors is that he takes long paper tubes, okay, and he casts the propellant into these long paper tubes. And I would suspect that they're like 3 foot long, okay. And then what he'll do is he'll let that propellant cure, then he slices it into small sections. This is like an F motor size section. Here's an E15 grain, okay, and slices it like that. For a core burner, he'll then either drill a hole or punch a core, but these are the infamous slot burners, which give you real nice grain characteristics. And if you look real close at these, you'll figure out what he does is he puts them on a radial arm saw and saws the grain. Which is, you obviously do it in a remote type situation, but it's a real neat, real very producible type system to do. So I'd say Gary is pretty innovative in that. Here's a grain cut sideways, okay, and you can see as you look through this, you can see a number of crystalline elements. Basically, what these motors are made up of is when they use the term composite, what they mean is, in this case, is a rubbery type binder, which is called HTPB, or hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene. And if you can say that fast 3 times, I'll give you this grain. But basically, it's a rubber-like binder, okay? And then what you use, it also has good fuel characteristics. And then you need the oxygen source, which is ammonium perchlorate. And if you all heard about the ammonium perchlorate plant that blew up in Las Vegas, the Pepcon plant, that's the stuff that goes in it. As a matter of fact, Gary uses Pepcon ammonium perchlorate. Of course, they rebuilt the plant in Cedar City, Utah, so he's not as close to his source of ammonium perchlorate, but nonetheless, that's what goes in there. So when you look at this screen, the black stuff is basically the binder, the HTPB, okay? And the white crystalline stuff is ammonium perchlorate. Ammonium perchlorate is a white crystal that kind of looks like salt. And you can vary the burn rate, and you can vary the specific impulse of the motors by playing with the ammonium perchlorate size is basically what you can do. If you grind up the ammonium perchlorate into a very fine dust, you get a lot faster burning motor. If you just use it as it comes from the factory, it's generally a slower burn motor. Gary has basically 2 formulations. If you look like it is E15 and his F25 and his G40, it's 1 burn rate, okay? And then he's got a different burn rate. He uses the same grain length for his E30 and F50 and G80 type motors. And so what he does is he varies burn rate, I would guess, by using the finer grind of ammonium perchlorate. You can get it in like 400 micron and 200 micron and a real fine grind of, say, 90 micron.
I don't know if this is the right point to ask you or not, but
oh yeah, this is open.
Does point where ignition occurs in the slotted engines or any of them make a difference in the time thrust curve? I mean, what if you only got it in at the tail end of the engine and you ignited it there versus all the way at the top of it?
If you ignite it at the bottom, you're going to see a slight lag compared to if you ignited it at the top, okay? most rockets, you're not going to be able to tell the difference.
What
Okay?
used to happen
You're
when
talking
you used
about
thermal?
Black powder, right?
Huh?
Black powder, right?
no, well, mostly on the composites. Okay.
But I thought if you light it at the end, then wouldn't you lose a lot of your...
No, you're talking about an ignition. The ignition transients on all these motors take on an order of about 50 milliseconds on the average. Okay, I can't tell 50 milliseconds in most, unless you get something where you got. If you get a slow ignition on motors, a lot of times it's because the propellant surface is catalyzed a little bit, and it's not as easy to ignite, and you're not really seeing a function of the igniter. Professionally, everybody likes to light them at the head end, okay, to do it. But at FICOL, we've got a number of half-end igniters, motors like that, and we can do this. Harder to ignite than the grain, and if you didn't get the energy of the igniter up to ignite that delay train off along with the grain, sometimes those delay trains wouldn't light and they wouldn't work. Okay, and as a matter of fact, if you've got an interjet motor, don't fly it because the delay trains have aged and they don't tend to ignite even if you do everything right. I flew like the last interjet in competition at NARCON 19, and they had been out of production for a considerable length of time then, and the ejection charge, it just didn't work. So there was some truth to that, but it was more or less because at that time to ignite the delay train than it was in actually igniting the core constituents of the motors. The Aerotech motors, he's improved the delay trains considerably, so it's not a problem. This is one of Scott Dixon's Smoky Sam grains. He uses a little bit different catalyst. I think that's a copper dichromate, and that's why it's got the green kind of color in it.
Is that where the white lightning, blackjack?
You get
all
the,
this
yeah,
comes
okay,
from?
yeah. What you get the neat effects from is for example, in his white lightning, and this is speculation because Gary hasn't told me, but I'm sure he puts magnesium in it. Okay, magnesium burns real bright. That's what's in flash bulbs, so that gives you white thing, your white kind of effect. You get the blackjack. There's various burn rate catalysts that you can use in order to give it the black coloration. The old FSI Thunderbolts put charcoal in. Okay, you can add charcoal. You can use copper dichromate as one to give you a black smoke like that, and you can play around. Corey Klein puts some strontium in his, and he gets a real nice blue-red or red-violet kind of effect. And that, so yeah, there's some things you can do that.
Those fire starter motors they use.
Those fire starter, yeah. Well, they use
Chunks
big
of,
chunks of aluminum.
Oh, okay.
I made a mistake. I had one of those grains. I'd have brought it. It's really crude. The chunks
So
are.
you can actually see chunks of aluminum.
Well, you can see big. Yeah. It's not finely ground like this.
Matt, when you add those kind of things, it takes away from the performance, doesn't it? I mean, if you add something like strontium or...
Generally, yeah, you do take away from the performance. Some of the things, though, are actually burn rate catalysts that will improve the burn rate. Okay, the copper dichromate is one. You can put iron oxide in. Professionally, we use a lot of iron oxide or aluminum oxide to control the burn rate, and that adds a lot of white smoke. That's kind of neat. So there are a couple of hoodoo chemicals that do increase performance, but generally, for what model rocketeers are interested in, the fire and smoke kind of stuff doesn't. Another thing that you can put in as the motors get bigger is aluminum, and big motors use aluminum as a fuel. Like they'll be almost 30% aluminum. The problem with aluminum is how it combusts in a small rocket motor. You don't have the same kind of dynamics. And aluminum generally is consumed outside the nozzle and doesn't add any effective thrust, so it doesn't add into itself. But aluminum makes really nice white smoke. And when you see space shuttle solids, okay, are about 30% aluminum, and because they don't care about the smoke, and you can see the really nice smoke trail come up from that. That's the tube basically. His casing to length, and what he'll do is he'll insert a nozzle, and I've got one here that's been machined out, and you can look and see. It's got an O-ring on the back end of it. It's kind of neat. All his motors have an O-ring. What he'll do is
Synchromate putty.
no, he doesn't need it. But what he does is he'll put the nozzle in place, and then he drops his delay train in place. And I got two different versions of his delay train. One, because the delay train burns for so long, it needs a lot more insulation, so it's got a thick paper outer wrap, and then you is his small quantity compared to the grain, is his delay. And what he does after that is then he basically just pours epoxy over the top, okay? And then how he varies the delay is that they go back in and they drill, okay? And what they do is they'll drill a hole to a certain depth, and a certain depth will give you, like if you drill it real deep, it gets a 4-second delay. If he drills it a little less deep, it gets a 7-second delay. If he doesn't drill it at all, maybe a 10-second delay. And they put the black powder down in there. So when it burns through to the hole and ignites black powder, that's how you get your ejection charge. And this is one you can clearly see that the hole is drilled. And so that's why you'll hear certain manufacturers and how you can change in a composite motor, you can always shorten the delay. That's because you drill down farther into the delay train. So that's one that shows you the delay train with the drill. Then this is a little bit newer one. He went away from the paper and it's got polyethylene insulator and spacer like that, which he told me gives him a little bit better performance. So here's one that's taken out and it's got the epoxy on the top and a hole drilled in it. And again, you can see the same kind of thing. He just puts this in the top of the motor, bonds it, pots the top in place.
Now I've heard that. So sorry.
That's okay.
I've heard that the delay train then keeps on burning even after the ejection charge has popped.
Yeah, you can see that some of that's going to do that when you get it through. You can see that when it hits the hole, there'll still be material left back in after burn.
So that's something you need to take in consideration because it'll burn through your body tube eventually.
Only on the real tiny motors. Okay, on the 18 millimeter and on the real small C's and B's that he's making for Ed. Okay, that effect becomes a little more apparent. Okay, but on the big ones, the only thing that it does is it'll melt the glue on his nozzle, and sometimes on the old ones, particularly his nozzles will drop. Used to drop in the case, and we used to get all sorts of people who would call and say, "Well, this motor was defective. I found the nozzle inside the case." And what happened is yeah, that would loosen up and do that, but that would be after ejection while the parts were soaking out, and the motor would have worked perfectly fine.
How does the ejection charge differ from that on black powder? Does black powder work the same way?
No change. A black powder is the same, except they don't drill. They just put a column of delay in, and then put a layer of black powder.
Preset amount.
Yeah, and you can't. And theoretically, you could change those, but the problem is the burst pressure in that material is not as resistant to fracturing, okay, on the pressure. And chances are, if you tried to drill in and change one of those, you'd probably just, when a motor burnout, would probably automatically eject.
So on the composites, they make just one set size. And
yeah, he just makes the longest. Yeah, he just casts the longest delay, and then when he wants to decide what kind of motor to make, they just go back and they know how deep to drill, and they just go ahead and drill it. So it's a slick little operation. And here's an E15 kind of stacked, then you can see. And all we did was machine out the top of the delay train and the core. You can kind of see how it all fits together.
As far as the delay train goes, could they just do like they do on the thrust part of the engine, just cut the length of the delay train down instead of drilling a hole?
Yeah, they could. It just gives him some flexibility in his manufacturing. And that's really the reason why he does it. Yeah, you can change the length. Okay.
Are these just laid together, or is there any compression?
No, you just need to butt them up against. Okay. See, okay. One thing that is, and you got to understand. Okay, I'm very, very impressed with Gary Rosenfield as Dan Meyer's engineering, because one of the problems you see on the grains. Okay, the neat thing about the grains is, unlike in black powder motors and some of the other approaches, is that the outside surface of the grain is covered with paper. Okay, we call that an inhibited surface. Okay, it won't burn. The propellant surfaces won't burn on those paper surfaces, and the propellant literally bonds itself to the paper tube. Okay, because even if flame would get around on the back side, it won't burn and it won't ignite the grain from the back side and increase the burning surface area. You aren't real concerned about that. On a black powder motor, if the grain separates away from the thing, you have a Kato because you increase the burning surface area and everything goes. These are almost Kato-proof from that kind of concept. So no, he just lays the one in, make sure the other surfaces basically touch and they don't rattle around. But even if you got one that rattled around, you'd be okay as long as the end closures stay in place. So yeah, you don't even have to worry about it. So like I say, it gives you a real neat control over both CATOs and also makes it very easy to manufacture.
Where did that term CATO come from?
Catastrophic failure is short for catastrophic failure. So, and speaking of CATOs, I got a couple here that I want to show you. These are propellant grains. Okay, this first one that's going around is from a Vulcan motor, and you will see that it ignited and started to burn, and what happened is that the front closure let go. Okay, and so it spit the grain out, and it dropped below engine operating pressure, and so the grain went out. But you can see the initial part of the burn pattern on the grain.
What a shot is?
Well, no, this was just a closure at the end.
What is a chuff?
What is a chuff?
Is that just when the igniter blows out?
No, a chuff is a. Some people can confuse. Okay, sometimes you just blow the igniter out. Okay,
That's just
a chuff is literally where the motor will start up to burn the grain. Okay, and then for some reason put the grain out. Okay, and it can be from a whole bunch of things. It can be from oscillations inside the motor. It can be the fact that the propellant formulation doesn't allow the flame to propagate or puts itself out. It can be the fact that the chamber pressure may be either reach too high and force it out. But chuff is actually a function of the propellant. The propellant actually burns and then goes out, and a lot of times will come back up, okay, depending on what it is. But you'll actually burn part of the propellant grain. This one, if it had lit back up, would have been a chuff, but it just kicked the grain right out. Like that.
At LDRS 9, I have video footage of a guy was launching an H, and it took off, and then about 2 seconds, it's like the engine shut down. I mean, and then 2 seconds later, 3 seconds later, it started back up again.
Yeah.
And it looked like a restart in the air.
That's a chuff. That's a chuff.
You know.
And they can go, and finally, and there. Go ahead, Rick.
Just speaking of chuffs, I've seen it happen a lot with Vulcan motors. They seem prone to it. When I had a Vulcan G50, had such an energetic chuff that it went all the way to the top of a 6-foot rod and hung there for about 3 seconds and then took off. So they can be scary.
Do you can relaunch? Are there certain when you personally do it? If you have a chuff, do you go back and relaunch it, or do you say,
No,
I'm not going
because-
to mess with the engine?
No, because you've used some of the total impulse
Exactly.
of the motor. I might static test it to see if it'll go. I hate to say it, but chuffs are really a part of the motor design, and if you're getting a motor that's chuffing, either something went wrong in the formulation, or somebody doesn't know what they're doing. On these little motors, it should be possible to design it without a lot of things. Chuffs can be a whole bunch of things. There's resonances inside the motor, and combustion instability.
A question back in the nozzles.
Okay.
Is Gary getting those made for him? Are they machined out of the
No,
material, or are they molded?
These are plastic molded. They're a kind of plastic, I assume, and I don't know, but you can get glass-filled phenolic plastics, and these are all pre-molded. As a matter of fact, when you go to reload, you can see like that. But yeah, they're all like that, and they're not as efficient as a graphite, okay? But for our purposes, they work really good. We don't have any motors that burn for a minute. I need a road to throw away.
Is that chuffing phenomenon that would occur in aged black powder motors?
No, chuffing generally is on composites only. Most of the black powder, because black powder formulation is really the same. You won't see a black powder motor chuff.
I remember having some old D13s they had to have been about 3 or 4 years old.
No.
And there was like
Those are
and that had an
That's
unusual-
D13.
They had an unusual curve to it. They had an unusual thrust curve.
But no, that you don't see that in black powder. That's really in composites.
Matt, when you have a long burning engine on the nozzle, is there any expansion on the nozzle that will alter the performance? If it burns like for 7 or 8 seconds, I mean, doesn't the
nozzle doesn't
temperature-
expand the actual throat area does. Okay, what happens is you just ablate the material away, or it just goes out with the hot gases, and so as like on an E6, okay, that nozzle throat actually gets bigger with time. Okay, and if you pick certain materials, you can keep that really minimized. Like if you use carbon, you practically don't have anything. Most tactical motors use like a silica phenolic, although some of the motors that we make a thought on, the Maverick, okay, I'm sure uses the same material as this. Hellfire's got something that that uses this as well. Okay, but it's really a function of the burn time of the motor and then the material that you select. And we don't have, 9 seconds is about as long as any motor burns, and that's considered real short. So this stuff, yeah. If you took and measured the throat before you fired the motor, and when you got it back, you would see that the throat diameter increased, but probably it would only be about 4 thousandths on the diameter or something like that. It's very minimal. You certainly can't see it. So this is another Vulcan motor, Smoky Sam, and this is the Vulcan's bulkhead. Okay, and he uses a similar type situation. But here is a grain that burned about 3 seconds through the burn, and then spit out the top. And what happened is there was a void in the propellant. Okay, and it increased the surface area, it increased the pressure, and blew the thing out. I found this inside the rocket, like that. But you can see the propellant burning surfaces on this, and when it went out, it's really kind of funky. And it's a result. It should be straight back, but as a result of the void, it got all sorts of crazy geometry on it like that. So that's kind of an neat piece to get back, and you can see that there's wicked things going on in the motors when they go like that. The problem that most composite motors have, and this is an example. This was I guess I'm cruel. This was from the NARCON demo last year at Rosenfield, the first motor they did, the Cato. This is it. But is the casing the size of a fracture? Okay. And sometimes in the control of the tubing and that, you'll get a bad piece or a piece will get dropped. And so if you have a Cato on a composite, they tend to be like this, a casing fracture, and that's the delay end of it. You see the delay is still intact, but it's split. So that's basically motor pieces and parts.
Yeah, what about that chamber pressure?
400 to 800 psi generally. I don't know anybody that runs higher than about 800 psi. And the reason you do that is safety more than anything else. If you don't run a high chamber pressure and something does blow up, it doesn't go a long distance. Also, if you run a low chamber pressure, you don't have to have very thick casing. Okay, most of these propellants can be formulated to be very efficient to run. Dixon's can run as low as 300 psi, which is really a benign environment. But yeah, they don't generally go. Professional rocket motors generally operate in the 1,000 to 2,000 psi range, but for the model stuff, we don't really need that. So.
Got a question. What happened to the model that this flew in?
It crashed. Where did it just kind of went up the pad?
It jumped in the air about 20 feet.
Yeah.
Did it blow a hole in the? Did it blow a hole in it?
The rest of the motor case went down, and that piece also. That was in the model, I think, or it went down too. I don't remember where we found it, but models. And here's a casing, and here is a. You can see the casing first. And what basically you have here is a metal case replacing the paper case or the paper phenolic case of a regular rocket motor, and screw-on, twist-on closures. Okay, that go together. And I'm just going to pass the pieces here and not assemble one of these, but you can see what goes on. Is that basically for each flight you replace the nozzle, you replace these have got 2 O-rings. You replace the propellant delay train, and what you do is that you replace the ejection charge. So there's a whole bunch of little parts. What I'm going to pass around so you can see kind of how it goes together. You have a nozzle, and you put the nozzle in place. I can get it the way it's supposed to go, like that.
That's the nozzle end.
Yeah, that's the nozzle end, and it also
couldn't figure out how that was
acts as a thrust ring, so that you got like that. And that's the
figure
green.
out how that was going to slide into the engine mount tube with that big
No,
ring.
no, it's backwards from that.
Okay.
And you get a delay train.
Does that also act as a compression ring as well? Then
Yes.
Compress the whole stuff.
Yes. Yeah, there's an O-ring in there that seals it off. It's got the same kind of delay train as what you've seen before. And then the ejection charge goes in the black top end up here, and you put a tape dot over it. I won't pass the O-rings around. If you want to come up and look later, you can come up and kind of paw this stuff around.
Has anybody done any long-term testing on those? I mean, like 100 flights on the engine.
Well, I've talked to Dan Meyer about this a little bit. You got to understand the lineage of this, okay? Coming from model rocketry, I'm sure that the concept of the model rocket is new, and it seems strange. But industrial solid propulsion, they also do a whole bunch of professional things. As a matter of fact, they make some N1300 motors that go into Pegasus fins for directional control, and they have a whole bunch of requirements to deliver those motors and test them to certain requirements. Well, what you do, and what we also do at THICAL, is when they cast a propellant, okay, they'll put those propellant grains in a metal test motor, okay, and fire it, get the ballistics, and then replace a nozzle and fire it again. And he had indicated that they'd had some of their very similar design lists, but a little bit bigger diameter. What you do is you just cast up some special grains like that they had gone through 2,000 test firings and was still going strong. At THICAL, we have a pool like 500 big metal test motors. We call them TX3s, and they're 3 inches in diameter and about that long, and screw-on closures, and we fire them and fire them. We've got the same 500 that we've used for I don't know, 10 years or something like that, and we fire about 50 of those a week.
These certified by NAR for use in indoor competition.
They will be shortly. They will be shortly. Jack Keane is coming up with a plan. They have put in, they're in the process of putting in the NFPA code clear wording that clearly allows the use of metal-cased motors, okay? And probably by NARCON, they will be certified for use in model rockets.
You have to be specially certified to use these, or could anybody?
That's not clear.
I think you ought to.
I don't know how it's going to go right now. I think probably you will. In other words, just like you'd be certified to use the H's and I's, but it's not clear whether that's really going to be a requirement or not. I mean, some people look at this and say it's no harder than a model airplane engine. So I don't know. I know Gary is going to sell them on the open market.
These are phenolic, right?
Huh? No, that's
aluminum.
It is.
yeah, T6061.
What kind of money we talking about?
The smallest one, I wanted to get it a lot, yeah, for the initial thing. That's the case and the metal closures, okay, that you saw there are like $100, okay. The reload kits are for the F is like $5.50, and for the G is like $6. So it takes, you have to figure your curve. It takes about 8 flights to make it pay.
To include the delay, the injection.
Yeah, everything in another igniter and like that.
What is it? I'm sorry.
No,
Well, I was just going to ask, I'm unfamiliar with the prices on these Fs and Gs, generally speaking.
come on down to the range store. And
I figured
They're
that.
expensive.
$6 to $15 for the one shot.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're talking probably about half the price of a one-shot engine for a reload kit.
Right. When it's paying, yeah.
So you have
pay off the
to
kits.
fly them twice as many times to get your money back.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, you got to keep in mind that this is just like the Astrocam. Is it on, like on the Astrocam, whenever you got the 12th flight, you'd use your 12 shots in the roll, and then that's when the model ended up in the tree. This is you're going to have maybe the same problems with some of these, is you'll buy this and plan on flying it, and when you get to the flight that's payoff point, that's the one when your model end up in the tree. You have to go buy in your cage class is the thread inserts. Okay, I mean, yeah, if you get, you can design, a thick enough in that, but it's just harder to work with, and I can't imagine in the long run that it would be less expensive than, there's tons of people that can go out and make these kind of casings in the professional industry, and can make them real cheap, mass-produced kind of item. But if you go to fiberglass, then you're going to have something that's either wound or bonded in place or something like that. So I would think from a design elegance as well as probably a reliability standpoint that the aluminum is probably the thing to use.
Fiberglass might not have the durability. Well,
Yeah, it's a possibility that the fiberglass would not be as the real problem with fiberglass is if you bounce it funny or something like that, you may bruise it and you don't know you damage the inner layers. Okay, if you bang one of these off on the table and it dents, then you know that you got a dent. and like that. But I think manufacturing problems will just keep everybody with aluminum for the most part. Now, they had talked about a molded plastic, a whole kind of reloadable thing, but I think they looked at the cost of that and said, you know, but they were looking at, well, what if reloadables, what if people decide that metal casing motors are not okay? But I think the consensus has pretty much been from the safety experts, as long as the airframe, you know, is not metal, that the small mass of the casing itself, some of those are 4 to 10 grams heavier than a regular motor. It doesn't really matter the construction. No, probably not.
Because the weight is...
Yeah, the weight's a disadvantage, but for practice
Do they offset the weight with a little bit more propellant?
No, because it's the same total input.
So it's the same total. So if I had a reloadable and a one-shot,
The one-shot
the one-shot's
is the
going
same
to be a better
model higher.
performance.
Yeah.
Ought to be. Since
Are those tubing sections, is that seamless tubing or seem like that out of bar stock?
I'm not sure what he's doing there.
I tell you, better
The serial number is like 12, okay? So I don't know if he's hogging them out of bar stock or, you know, the slickwood would go to seamless tubing and flow form it. You know, I mean, you could really do some neat things with it, but I don't know if he's made enough or looked into it or knows enough about metal fabrications to do that. So I suspect that it's hogged out of bar stock, but I don't know.
What do you mean by that?
drill that.
Well, you can buy the tubing.
Oh, okay.
Machine it, or you can get yourself a bar of aluminum and
And
have a
just
guy
drill it out.
bore it and yeah.
And it's better to get the no, what do you say is better?
The extruded seamless is better.
Is better.
Well, better
Certainly
from a cost
cheaper.
standpoint, yeah. I mean, both will work just real fine. It's just how you're set up to do what you want to do.
This is the,
There are some,
and
and they all have a margin of safety like 8 to 1 or 10 to 1 or something like that. I've seen them like that. The other thing is he did do some pretty good safety testing for what I've seen. If it's a ductile aluminum alloy, cause it to be a problem for, say, example, propellant void or something like that, that would cause it to overpressurize the case. Okay. What will happen is the aft closure, there's a weak spot designed in the interface between the aft closure and the case that will break the aft closure off. So if it was sitting in a model or something like that, that closure will spit itself out just down like that, and it'll go one direction. And so that's the safety mechanism, even if it overpressurizes, which is probably in a way smarter than these kind of things, because when these go, you don't know where the hell. They're supposed to design to have a weak point, but when the case goes, you don't know if that was weaker than the other point. So
When you have that happen, then you're out in RMS, right?
you have to talk to Gary. I would imagine he'd give you another case if you managed to screw one of those up.
Now, what would happen on those cases if, let's say, somebody didn't screw the top on right,
Okay.
stripped it out a little bit, or...
Then they kind of just fizzle and fuzz and won't lift the rocket off the pad. If you don't put the O-rings in, okay, and it does ignite, okay, it might vent, okay, but it probably won't be propulsive.
So these are pretty much stupidity safe.
They are really well engineered where the fact that, yeah, I feel pretty confident that I could give anybody one of these and you could sit down and read the instructions and even if you've never even flown a composite motor before, that you could put one of these together right and go out and fly it. They're pretty good. He's got some improvements to make. I think everybody is unhappy with having to deal with the grains of the ejection charge. Okay, but you know what? Other than that, I think he's going to work on some packaging for that, where it's already in the K-plug, you don't have to worry about it. But other than that, yeah, I think that they're real good. I think that anybody would be able to do it if they can afford it.
Are you in line for one?
I'll get a bunch. I've got a bunch of everything. You'll see here in a minute.
since you mentioned it, what you mentioned, if you ding the tube, you can see it. It begs the obvious question then: how seriously can you ding this tube before you have to get?
But if you can't slide the propellant in there anymore, then...
Yeah, I mean, at what point, if you have 20, 30, 40 flights, it could conceivably pick up some dings. How serious are those as far as getting rid of it are concerned?
I mean, as long as you can slide the propellant in, I'm sure that the vessel's got enough integrity to hold it.
Fatigue won't cause it to.
No. As a matter of fact, the alloy he's picked is very resistant to fatigue, and so it's a good choice from that, and it also doesn't react to the chemicals in the exhaust or anything like that and do any hydrogen embrittlement or anything like that. So it's a pretty good choice the way that they've handled it for that. So
The safety code says obviously you can't modify, currently modify
Right.
manufactured engines.
Right.
This is really getting close to getting a touchy subject in that area. What's to keep people, because you're actually sitting there looking at the grain and the core, to recore it, or put a star core in, or anything like that to
there's
play
nothing
with
to
the
stop
performance.
somebody from that, but what's the difference between that and somebody doing it with black powder when it exists now? Yeah, that's kind of what we looked at. If people are going to screw with them, people are going to screw with them.
Regardless,
It
even though
doesn't
it's
matter
easier
what-
to do now
Yeah.
because you got the grain in your
Yeah.
hand.
And that's a related issue too, because it goes on to, okay, like we're talking about certification. What if North Coast brings out the reload kit that says they put for an Aerotech motor, and how do you test it, and how do you certify it, and what do you do, and is that legal? Or what if Vulcan brings out another set of cases and closures, and says use Aerotech reload kits? So those things got to be kind of
What if U.S.
figured out. Yeah, well, or US Rockets. No, now you're talking about something serious. Yeah,
Yeah,
what
exactly.
if US Rockets brings out a reload kit and says it's for the Aerotech thing, and they ain't worth a shit?
Right.
And then what do? You go to Aerotech, you go to US Rockets. I can tell you where Aerotech's going to tell you to go.
There's the road.
The only thing about those reloadables is you better use an engine club of some sort.
Yeah, that's
Retaining
the other
device,
thing.
so you'd be
Yeah, Gary
stupid
found
if you
out
did
the
it.
hard way at Narren when he kicked his first reloadable engine into the field. Good engine hooks are a
Was
must.
that ever found?
Nope.
No, and somebody probably pocketed
Nope.
it.
Oh, so you
You'll
don't
see
take
it
them
10
in.
years at an option.
You don't just take them in.
No. They want something constant.
Reloadable.
You want to put your $100 motor in with tape?
I want it back.
No, not a good
Yeah,
idea.
put a beeper in your. You figure an engine and a payload, you could in theory have $300 or $400 in hardware on your rocket.
Yeah.
And
And
we're
the
not
thing
the
is,
government, we can't afford to shoot.
well, the thing is though too, is motor performance is there now, where you don't have to worry about cutting an ounce here or half an ounce here. You can afford to carry a beeper on almost any of those flights without worrying about it, because the power is there. It's not, we're not just total impulse weak anymore, where you worry about half Newton second or something like
Well,
that.
with the reloadables, why not just get rid of the ejection charge altogether and just come out with electronic ejection system? Something you can program the ejection charge on, so that you can just.
There's somebody at Aerotech who's talking about something like that, so I guess I'm not really at
Like dial an ejection charge,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
Dial a charge.
dial a delay train, or whatever,
It's possibly being considered. Scott
Because-
Pierce told me that he's working on, he's got a bulkhead with a pressure sensor in it. So when the motor pressure comes up and then goes down, then it sets off the timer.
See, that's
So,
what you don't
that's a
get.
possibility.
Don't
And
sound
it
like
would
you're-
be a closure that would you just replace the ejection closure with something like that. So they are kind of looking at that now, how that goes.
That's one of the nice things about this system, is if they decide to do something a little bit different, they just give you
They have the ability to
give you another
modify
screw on,
that.
give you
That's
another
what I like
screw
about
on part. Yeah.
Don't the Europeans use RC to deploy parachutes anyway?
Yeah, they generally do, yeah. So, yeah, it can move that way, that's a distinct possibility.
No, but it opens up a whole new stuff, so I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
Opens up a whole new set of aftermarket manufacturers, hot rods, you're RMS. Well,
Well, yeah, delay time or dual delay, dual delays if you use the pressure switch or something like that. I mean, you could pop a drogue chute here, and you could pop a,
or staging. You can do
or
things with
stage.
staging.
Then to Aerotech, this was the first ones that Gary Rosenfield basically made. This is a neat motor. It's got a ceramic nozzle in it, like that. And those were followed then by the Projets, composite dynamics Projets, which were really a neat model rocket motor, and was really the first wave of composites after the Interjets kind of rebirth. It's also got, you'll see though, a cast ceramic nozzle on it.
Matt, on the SMI engines, they're not. You said those are not true composites, but they're not black powder either.
Well, they're not composites in the sense that they're not the HTPV ammonium perchlorate motors. What they are is I believe what they are. I'm not 100% certain. Is they're a polyurethane-based binder motor system. Okay, so they're kind of in between. They are technically a composite, but it's manufactured in a vastly different way, and it uses polyurethane instead of HDPE as a binder. And I think the grains are extruded, but I'm not sure.
There's nothing you can do to black powder to make it hotter.
Nope. No. Once you get it, basically it's been optimized. Yeah. And then this is a crown. This is a crown, which is what small sounding rocket systems went to.
I asked about that.
Might not get hot enough.
And if you were going to ask about a Canarock motor, here is a Canarock C motor with a unique nozzle in the back. You'll want to look at that. That's not a fired motor. That is a brand new.
It looks like it's going to fire.
And let's see, other composite motors. There's a Whirlwind. That's a deceased company. And I'll pass these around. Please don't drop these or they may go off. I got D13.3 and D13.7 for those who've never seen an actual D13.
Thanks, Steve.
Also, you need this Cox motor for that. For those who've never touched one of those, they make Cox quit making their rocket motors when they had an accident and killed 3 people. And that's what got them out of
They have some of the neatest igniters, though.
accident or
manufacturing accident.
I like the Cox igniters.
Which
Some of the neatest igniters.
Cox igniters were absolutely fantastic.
Plug in. You just
This
plug
is
the
a
igniter in and that was it.
this is a real favorite of mine. This is a Narum 10 motor from Estes. It was manufactured in honor of Narum 10 and its cane, but this is an extended D12, which they call an E11.8. This happens to be a booster motor. Mike and I were talking. If you want to see what I think the future, what they're going to do at Estes, I think they very easily have the capability to do this kind of motor. And I
What is that now?
This is an E11. It's a double length D12.
So it's just a long,
Yeah,
two
yeah.
D12s long.
Yeah, it's it's the same design and everything. It's just
So you just
it's
get a longer,
E-powered. Yeah.
longer burning
Yeah.
D, basically a longer
Yeah.
burning D.
Yeah, it's a 4-second burn motor instead of like that, which is kind of a neat application. This is an Internet's long burn E that came from Flight Systems when Flight Systems was still in Louisville, Colorado.
Yeah, when they were still
Long before like that.
They had that pulsator. What's it called? A pulsator? Or?
Yeah, I didn't bring those out. I got some of those too. And these, I don't know if you've seen, these are Gary's, here's a full E motor. This is an E45-7 in an 18 millimeter case.
He hasn't sold
And
those yet, has he? The 18 millimeter F?
The 18 millimeter F he didn't bring out because it was just not the demand, but that's a 60 Newton second F motor, 18 millimeter case.
Hey Matt, on this engine here, the nozzle looks like it's ceramics. Looks like it's got pits in it. Doesn't that deter from the performance?
Yeah, it's not nearly as nice, but it was produced by. And then I got to show you this because this is the absolute killer here. This is the ugliest motor I have ever seen. This is Yugoslavia. This is a Yugoslavian F motor. Okay, total impulse of 80 Newton seconds, and maximum thrust is 100 newtons. This is the Yugoslav equivalent to our beloved F100, except it's a real F100. Okay, it's got pre-installed igniter. It's got kind of bonded on, really cruddy looking closures. It's a trip. I got a couple of these. Ejection charges don't work on them.
They use seed clouds or something, right?
No, one guy used it to fly a real nice model X15, and it augered in. It was kind of ugly. But I got some other Yugoslav motors as well that I'll pass around that we got, and you can see that they do have some nice technology really to make small size motors. They've got a Mini A and a Mini B, and I think this is a Mini C. And how they build the motors over there in Yugoslavia is they have clubs, and this is called the 19th December Club, which I don't know if it's something revolutionary. Yeah, I know. Okay, but I do think it has something related to that, but I never bothered to ask. too much, but anyhow, they make them in clubs or something like that. So that happens to be 19 December is actually the Belgrade Club, and they have another club that does it as well. And I'm running out of time. Let me pass around the last of these. Here's if you've never seen a microjet, that's a quarter A microjet that's been fired. Here was a nice AVI motor for those that have never seen an AVI 18 millimeter. And I'll just let you come up here if you want to see these afterwards. We've got a whole bunch of different micromotors. Before there were some rules imposed like that, it was a contest to see how small a mini A motor you could make. And these are just some examples. This one, though, is a particularly a neat motor. Got any guess who made this?
You.
Estes. This is an Estes Micro A. The thing of it is it really did defeat Ed Brown. These things shot the wad and Cato left and right. And they could not figure. Well, they couldn't figure out. They never figured out why, but they did. They're not sure what they were doing, but these are. I've got some Russian and I've got a Yugoslavian.
Casey not big enough to pick on that?
Don't know. He changed papers. He played around with that, and then these are the composite mini A's then that we ended up using. Yeah. So, but if you want to come up and look at those are kind of neat.
Do the Europeans have any dependable manufacturing company?
No, they make them all in clubs. And so what we are going to do is start to import. Where's Tara's at? The Russians are making some motors. And I'm getting ready to send these off to standard and test them. These are Russian mini A's, 11 millimeter motors.
Is it possible that we could see some of the other Russian motors here?
Yeah. I'm working on a deal.
Have labels.
Tell them you want to help their economy.
There's probably a good market for ours over there. Unfortunately, they don't have dollars.
Yeah.
This composite or black powder?
Black powder. Two people killed. They've had 2 people killed there on all the motors they made, which is considerably better than Cox, which getting 3 people killed in one explosion is I understand one person getting killed, but if you're ever in a potential where something should blow up, there shouldn't be 3 people there, it should only be 1. But mistakes do happen, and yeah, they build there so that they understand that they're going to have some blow up in that. So.
Who did the
the same guy that made the original RDC motors, the Irv Waite.